this is Erica, and I'm going to be sharing with you how God has used trials in my life to grow me. The first major trial in my life was the trial of being pregnant out of wedlock. I was not a Christian at the time, but I grew up in a Catholic home that valued life highly, and I appreciated that. I didn't want to abort, even though the father did. Thank God that he put a Christian pregnancy center along my path where they really helped me make that decision forward to proceed with the pregnancy and protect the life inside of me. However, being a single mom was hard. I was a college student. I had to continue doing school and try to juggle that with being a mom. God used difficult situations. The baby's dad left the country and then came back to the country. I was praying that we would be a family, that we would get married. And so I moved in with him, and that proved a disaster. He was abusive emotionally and then physically, to the point where I had to call the police, and Child Protection Services came and said that I had to move or they would take my child away. So I ended up living on my own. I was all alone and hurting, and God gave me the desire to pull out Bible from my shelf and start reading it. I had gone to some Christian churches that college friends had invited me, and I had teared up and cried, but my life still was not changing. I was still seeking attention and partying and men and knowing that it was wrong. However, when my cousin called and I happened to have been reading the Bible, she invited me to a harvest crusade where an evangelist spoke about his son's recent death and had this peace, which he explained was only from God, knowing his son was in heaven, not because he was a good person and did XYZ, but because of his faith in Christ. And that day I gave my life to him. I believed by God's grace and did a total 180 turn where God gave me just a passion to want to live for him and tell of his glory and of how he saved me. I was in my last year of college and still a single mom. It was difficult because I had a new passion, and yet I also had responsibilities and persecution that came from my own family and at school as I was evangelizing. And I started to pray. I started to have different desires. Instead of wanting just to be successful in this life, I wanted to really live in light of what God calls me to as a mother. And so I started wanting to raise my son in a godly way and praying for a husband for him. God provided a husband for me, and that was another trial that I went through, having to submit to another man who's now leading me and my son, who I knew more. And so having to trust God and let my husband make the mistakes that he was making, having never raised a child. My husband also was a youth pastor. When we got married, we got thrown into ministry, and the trials of that, just of dealing with sin and moving to different states. When he accepted a position as a senior pastor, we found out he had a rare genetic disease, which led to his death. And that was devastating to hear, that I had finally had this husband that I'd been praying for and thinking we'd spend the rest of our lives together. And we had this little 2-year-old son now, and he had his dream job of being a senior pastor, and now his life would be taken. And yet God drew me again to himself, to trust in his sovereignty, to place my husband in his hands and realize that he wasn't mine to keep. He was on loan from the Lord, which I wrote a book titled On Loan from the Lord to share just all that God did through that journey. It was amazing to see God in the details, God give me and him a peace that surpasses understanding, a desire to use that opportunity to share Christ with everyone there in the hospital, and seeing the church come around us and really be a testimony of Christ to the world. God used me being a widow as well to draw me to depend on him more and on his church, to see the beauty of his church. which was hard to see when you're married to a pastor and deals with all the sin in the church, just to see the church then be the arms and feet in compassion. God often does use trials to humble us and show us our need for Christ and salvation. And he definitely used trials in my life to grow me, to be more like his son, and to point me to him who suffered the ultimate trial of being on a cross and bearing our sin so that we could be set free from sin and death. Thank you.